First, we have Ali Wardak, who is a reader in criminology at the University of Glamorgan in the UK. He also is vice president of the South Asia Society of Criminology and Victimology, and from 2006 to 2008, he worked for the UN Development Fund, part of the UNDP, I gather, in Kabul, and is also a co-author of the Afghanistan Human Development Report 2007, is the author of numerous articles and some books here, including Social Control and Deviance, a South Asian Community in Scotland, Transnational and Comparative Criminology, and Race and Probation. And I'll also introduce our other panel colleague before turning the microphone over, Andrew Garfield, who is a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, an institution that I know well and like. He's also a founding partner of Gleavum Associates, a strategic communication consultancy which specializes in face-to-face research and analysis in conflict and post-conflict societies. Fairly obvious how that's relevant here. He has also lectured at the Naval Defense University, the Naval Postgraduate School, and for the US Army on many occasions. And he also has worked in information operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan, so you can bring a comparative perspective of this. And finally, he recently led a joint US-UK study that recommended a new strategy to reform the Afghan National Police and the wider Afghan justice sector. Not too difficult a task there. So let me turn the podium over first to Dr. Wardak and then to
Good afternoon, and I'm very honored and privileged to be here today speaking at this important forum on rule of law reform in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I'm very grateful to Penn Law School and to the National Constitutional Center for organizing this conference on Afghanistan and Iraq, the two countries which have suffered from oppression, dictatorship, and more recently from varieties of international interventions, misconduct, and mismanagement. As you could see from the screen, I will be talking about reconciling formal and informal justice in Afghanistan. In this presentation, I'll be focusing on 5 key issues. First of all, the current state of formal justice system in Afghanistan. Second, the informal justice. And third, the positive and negative aspects of informal justice. And fourth, a hybrid model of both formal and informal justice, which my colleagues and I developed and proposed 2-3 years ago when I was working for the UNDP. And finally, the challenges for the upcoming decade. But before all this, I would like to say that Afghanistan's legal and justice system, or legal order and justice system, are based mainly on positive law, Islamic Sharia, and also customary law. These 3 core components of the Afghan legal order and justice system coexisted in a kind of symbiotic relationships with each other before the 1979 Soviet invasion and the consequent jihad or war to which Dr. Samar referred and spoke about. This kind of justice system, or the kind of legally pluralistic system, was well established throughout, well established nationwide, and provided the backbone of rule of law throughout Afghanistan. Although the administration of justice involved long delays and corruption, it nevertheless was a functioning system. However, after the Soviet invasion and the consequent war, the justice system was badly damaged. The damage did not only include damage to the physical infrastructure of justice institutions, but also hundreds of lawyers, attorneys, and other justice officials were killed, imprisoned. Others chose exile. And the main institutions that produced, if you like, lawyers and judges and justice officials largely became dysfunctional. So, after the collapse of the Taliban and the establishment of the post-Taliban administrations, the administration inherited a complex and complicated job in rebuilding or building from scratch the Afghan justice system. National and international efforts were mobilized, although as Dr. Samar mentioned, in a very bad way, to rebuild the justice system. Now, I'm going to look at what are the achievements in the past, what have we achieved in the past 9 years, and what are the problems. I'll go very quickly. Progress with regard to the formal justice system is mainly limited to 5 key issues. First of all, capacity building and professional training. There has been much emphasis on capacity building as far as the judges, attorneys, police officers are concerned. Hundreds or thousands of police officers have been trained. Hundreds of judges, attorneys have been educated, actually, in this country and other parts of the world. Also, physical infrastructure has been improved. New buildings have been built from scratch, or the existing one have been refurbished. One of the most significant and noticeable progress was with regard to legislation. I don't remember the exact number, but probably about 30 laws have been passed, although some as problematic as the Shiite personal law. But nevertheless, they have been amended, and I think mainly they created good to Dr. Samar and to her organization and other women organizations in Afghanistan. Legal reform, there have been kind of legal reform. Currently, the civil code and the criminal code is being reformed, but again, as Dr. Samar mentioned, the parliament is really dominated by people who are mainly responsible for the kind of situation which we were before before the current administration. So this is mainly some of the progress that has been made. But what are the problems? Well, despite the fact that there have been training and emphasis on capacity building, some of these capacity buildings have been kind of quick fixes here and there and kind of legal engineering. We still have we still face serious inadequacy of professional human resources. I'll go quickly because also inadequacy of physical infrastructure of justice institutions and facilities. I mean, physical infrastructure, including prisons and detention centers. A crucial issue here is the lack of coordination among key justice institutions as a system. The Afghan justice system really, you know, when you say justice system, it means that all the main institutions should have kind of chain-like, organic relation with one another. In Afghanistan, really that relationship lacks. It is not really a system. Lack of coordination among key international actors. Dr. Mars said the Italians focus on one thing, the Americans on something else, the Germans on the police, and there was really no lack of coordination. And I think, to me, that although they are last, but the most serious problems are corruption. The justice system is thoroughly corrupt, although some people say I exaggerate, but it's no exaggeration. And corruption is mainly, again, at a very highest level. People in position of power, whether it is military power, not necessarily the state, of course the state, but those who are outside of the state, they continue to intervene in the activities of the justice system, and also really bribery. And therefore, if in this kind of situation, an incompetent justice system, a corrupt justice system, people don't trust it. But we still have a social order. So from where does the social order that we have? We have a society that's functioning. At village level, there are high degree of order, whatever kind of order is, but there is an order. It comes mainly from informal relationships, social norms and values. So I'm now turning to informal justice system. And when I was working on Afghanistan Human Development Report in 2007, it focused on rule of law in Afghanistan. When I say I was working, it was field research as well as library-based research. We found that 80% of all kind of disputes were dealt with by jirga and shura, informal justice system. Jirga and shuras are basically councils of elders, local elders at village level. When there is a dispute, people go to them because of their expertise in dispute resolution. They're also highly respected. They have social status, and they have also, they're generally seen as piety. There is a criteria why people go to them. Of course, I'll come to that later. But these people, when they sit together, they have local knowledge, and there is, centuries-old customary law in Afghanistan. They apply local knowledge and customary law in order to reconcile and diffuse the problem that exists between two people, between two persons, between two clans or even villagers. The main emphasis is not on punishment. The main emphasis is on restoring harmony, on reconciling disputants, special offenders, and victims, and reintegrating them back into the communities. But of course, this is a very rosy picture. Can you see any problem with this picture? Ms. Nurstanish, you must...
Really male-dominated.
Exactly. I mean, look at, that's right.
Older men, actually.
Yeah. Can you see any woman there? And how could it provide justice to women, especially women are part of the dispute? So one of the problems is it is mainly male-dominated institution. But as I said, it has both positive and negative aspects. It's an Afghan institution. It has existed for for hundreds, thousands of years. What shall we do with it? Shall we abolish it? Can we abolish it? Or we look at it. What are its positive aspects? What are the negative aspects? Can we control its negative aspects and capitalize and use its positive aspects, which are organic, which are Afghan, and which are sustainable? So let's look at the positive and negative aspects. I can't see it, but I think, the outcomes of jirgas and shura. I think I'll look at here. What are the main outcomes of jirgas and shura? What are they say? What do their decisions end up in? Burning offender's house, for example, if there are two offenders, we asked 2,300 people throughout Afghanistan, men and women, that what are the main outcomes of jirga or shura decisions? They say burning of offender's house. Very bad, It is actually crime as a social control and mechanical social control. But luckily, not many people, a very small minority. And even worse, some say it, a minority of the people say, that one of the outcomes of jirga and shura is bad. Bad means the use of women as a means of dispute resolution. For example, if someone, an offender's close relative is forced to get married to the victim's close relative, so that the feud is replaced by peace. But what is the fault of the poor lady who is just used as a means for conflict resolution? But again, it is exaggerated, and I emphasize it is exaggerated. Even this data show more. More recent data show that very few people, and again through Dr. Samar's organization, more recent research by ARAU shows that it has declined significantly in the past few years. But nevertheless, one case is too much when a woman is forced to get married. and also in a kind of conflict-ridden situation. Also, another outcome of Jirga and Shura decision is, boycotting the decision, excluding it actually from the community. But again, not majority, a small, about 40% of people say they sometimes will always do that. But the main outcomes were compensation of the victims. When basically it is the person who is found to be the victim, he's compensated, but compensated in a legitimate way, mainly monetary compensation. But the main outcome, about 80% of people say that it is sulh. Sulh in Arabic means reconciliation, making peace. Very interestingly, when I say positive aspect, this sulh and reconciliation, it is very much resembles to some of the most modern ideas in contemporary criminal justice. It is restorative justice instead of retributive justice. Retributive justice, tooth for tooth. But here, no, mending relationships, reintegrating offender back into the community instead of excluding him or her and making him further criminal. So, what we do with this? Shall we abolish jirgas? Shall we keep them? Or we could find a more, a different way to link it to the formal justice system. So my colleagues and I developed a model which is, sorry. Oh, it works this way. We call it hybrid model. Basically, how long do I have?
We have 2 or 3 minutes.
2, 3?
3 or 4 minutes.
Can we make it 5?
Sold.
All right, okay. Okay, well, basically, here, in the middle, there is the formal justice system. We proposed a human rights unit just to create more jobs for Dr. Samar's employees. And the Jirga unit, we proposed that these two units should be linked to the formal justice system, where all major civil disputes and minor criminal offenses or disputes could be directly dealt with by Jirga and Shura, by those elders that you have just saw. But how do you control if they are to abuse their power? We say that their decision must not be legitimate or approved unless it is approved by human rights or other civil society institutions and the Court of Justice. So it does not contradict Afghan law and human rights principles. And still, if the disputants accept the decision, that's fine. So it gets judicial power. If it does not, if it is civil issue, it goes back to here, and if it is criminal, here. Also, Afghanistan in the past several years, a culture of human rights violence, especially against women, have developed. All right, yeah. Here we also thought that human rights violation, especially and domestic violence, the criminal justice system is only male-dominated. We say criminal justice system. There are 3% of judges. The proportion of judges, or the percentage of justice in Afghan justice is 3%. And how many police officers? I just recently inquired. Among the 120,000 police officers, there's only 900 women police officers. So that means less than 1%. So we thought human rights organizations should deal with domestic issues, with domestic violence and human rights issues. And of course, all serious criminal cases must be the exclusive monopoly of the formal justice system because it's too complex. Well, in this way, I personally, I honestly feel that we could provide transparent, sustainable. This is crucial. The money that are paid to the criminal justice system, it's come from the West. For how long this money will be pouring? But if you do the justice system in this way, it is organic. You don't pay for the elders. They're volunteers. So it is sustainable. It is organic. It is Afghan. But at the same time, you could control its violation by the Human Rights Commission and by the Court of Justice. It is also not only cost effective, it is more effective. You know, I'm sure that Samar knows, and also some of the legal experts who have been to Afghanistan. A simple case could take years, but these people, they decide in 3 days, or 5 days, or 7 days. And anyway, what is justice? Is justice what the state says it is justice? To me, justice is when the two people, disputants, and those who resolve the disputes, reach a decision that is acceptable to all the three and does not contradict the Afghan law and human rights principle. That is justice. Justice doesn't mean filling forms or going to paying a bribe to lawyers or to corrupt officials. So this was the idea that we proposed. It has an angry response from the Afghan government. I was summoned by the Supreme Court, and Dr. Samar helped me, actually. I was almost prosecuted, really. But also, interestingly, Dr. Samar's colleagues also responded, not angrily, but they not sympathetically. But I was in Vienna at a conference, and one of the leaders said, look, this is against women. I said, what bit of it? Have you read it? So, no, I don't have time for reading it. But I just don't see what is against women in this model. Well, if, it has created a healthy debate in the Afghan society, and now the government now has, not now, but for the past 2 years, has formed a working group comprising of Minister of Justice, Supreme Court, and HRC, or Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. But they have been discussing this for the past 2 years. When the new Minister of Justice, he said, no, he doesn't like this idea, this should be a law. But I think there should be a law for informal justice. I had a look at the recent draft. I think they're over-regulating this. And if it's over-regulated, then there is no difference between formal and formal. And the informality, the positive aspects of the informal justice will be lost. Just 1 minute, okay. Sorry. Oops. Oh, I didn't. Sorry, just the last.
Sorry, I didn't do that.
Just like the challenges, some of the key challenges. Sorry. Well, first of all, one of the key challenges is nationwide security. You know, justice system nowhere operates in a vacuum. When justice officials could not operate without fear and intimidation, the justice system will not work. Secondly, control of corruption and making the politically, militarily, and economically powerful accountable to law. Afghanistan has this kind of problem, the kind of problem Iraq does. Corruption is really endemic. But I must say, it is also, there is a strong international element to this corruption. You know, the people who go from this country, including military officers, they are deeply involved in corruption. And Afghan political leaders have close connection with them. Otherwise, this corruption will be impossible. Billions of dollars could not be processed by Afghans. There is strong international connection, or as far as corruption is concerned. And what is very sad, some of the most corrupt people in Afghanistan, the ministers who were suspected for corruption, are Western educated like me, who were basically speaking about human rights, and that's very sad. And finally, I'm still believing, so this is a challenge. The final challenge is basically building a justice system that reflects the cultural, religious values of Afghan society, but at the same time, which is sensitive to human rights principles. I think this is a possibility. We can't have just a black and white picture. We need to, the world is complex, and we need to produce complex ideas. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
The other health warning I want to offer was from Alexander Dumas, and he said all generalizations are dangerous, including this one. I will make in 15 minutes some sweeping generalizations about Afghanistan. I can promise you that I do have the information on the outliers and things that don't conform to the majority view. but I need to get through this quickly, so please forgive me. So why am I here if I'm not an expert on the rule of law? Well, first of all, I would like to represent to you, the elites in the rule of law, the perspective of the tens of thousands of Afghans that I interview each month, who will be either the beneficiaries or the victims of the reforms, constitutions, and laws that you help to create or implement. And secondly, and I'll go to my first slide. Where do I point? Okay. Oh, excuse me. Okay, secondly, from my entire professional life, I have either practiced, studied, or lectured on counterinsurgency strategy. And we are very much involved in a counterinsurgency struggle in Afghanistan. And it is my belief that we succeed in a counterinsurgency by securing and holding the support of the population. This can only be achieved when one addresses the needs of the population. This includes basic security and the rule of law extended to all citizens, providing jobs, developing the economy, restoring and expanding essential services, and helping to develop representative, legitimate governance. And the military, our military, has a huge role to play in all of these areas. A cornerstone of stability, which encourages people to support their government and to do what we're asking them to do, which is to risk their lives and to die for their government, is the effective implementation of the rule of law, which is why I'm interested. So some of the things I would like to talk about, first of all, the fact that when you're thinking about the reform of the Afghan legal system, and my colleague here has already talked about this, the Afghans themselves already have a very sophisticated understanding of the rule of law, what they expect from the rule of law, and to whom they would turn in order to get their disputes resolved. First of all, we have to remember that Afghanistan is a dispute-riven society. If I just take a survey done in 3 key provinces, Ghazni, Logar, and Wardak, we can see that 40% of the respondents in these 3 provinces needed assistance with the resolution of disputes. That's 40% who could not resolve the disputes. It doesn't mean 40% who had disputes, because many of them got them resolved through, for example, the jirgas. In all of these provinces, the Afghans turn to different authorities to resolve different disputes, as my colleague has already pointed out. And I will come to this again in a moment in my summary. So we have to take into account these different legal authorities and courts, if you like, when considering how to reform the Afghan legal system. Among all of the respondents, each of them had a different best legal authority or court to whom they would turn in order to resolve a dispute or address an issue. When the data is combined, When the data is combined, you see that 90% of the Afghans who've been surveyed, and this is consistent in multiple surveys, identify multiple legal authorities who are best to resolve a specific conflict, dispute, criminal activity, or issue. The next point I'd like to make, I'm sorry, I'm hitting this too fast, is about corruption. I'm going to use a survey recently undertaken in Kandahar, which was leaked to the press and was very prominent in the early debate on where we were going in Kandahar at the beginning of this year. Corruption is the biggest single problem facing Afghanistan, in my view. It affects the daily lives of every single Afghan in multiple ways. And as a result of that corruption, their support for their government is seriously undermined and being further undermined. And it encourages them to support other alternative power brokers, and to include the Taliban. If I might use the model of the recent BP incident, there's no point in cleaning up the oil in the Gulf of Mexico if you don't first stop the leak. And so if we do not deal with corruption, we will not solve any of Afghan's other problems. Just quick statistics, vast majorities from 75% down to as low as 40%, but averaging around 53%, see corruption affecting their daily lives in multiple ways, in their dealings with the district government, in their perceptions of the national government, and in their encounters with the provisional government. And again, this is consistent across all districts and provinces in Afghanistan. Even in those districts where all other measures are stable, corruption is still identified as their biggest problem, their biggest threat. This is particularly prevalent at the district level in many areas, and the 3 institutions that are seen as most corrupt in this area, in Kandahar, the district government, the police headquarters, and the court. You have to pay to get just about anything in Afghanistan. Look at the center statistic here in resolving civil court cases. 52% total majority believe they have to make a payment to get resolution. There's no wonder then that Afghans look to and prefer swift informal justice to the government court system. So moving on to Afghans' perceptions of the government court system, and I'll leave Kandahar and move back to Ghazni, Logar, and Wardak provinces. The good news is that significant majorities in all of these areas would prefer to take their major disputes, that is those disputes not resolved by the jirgas, the elders, or religious authorities, the major disputes, to government courts. The disputes that cannot be resolved by the elders and the more serious disputes and criminal activity, they would prefer their government to resolve. That's a very positive development. But unfortunately, government courts are perceived as slow and inefficient by a majority in these provinces, and unfair by a slim majority. A similar majority are also willing, as a result, to seek alternatives. The good news is, primarily, that's traditional and religious authority. However, and I should add that majorities also in these provinces do not see the government courts, even when they adjudicate fairly, as able to enforce the decisions that they make. The majority of respondents are not keen to turn to the Taliban to resolve their disputes if they have a choice. However, although Taliban courts are also perceived in a slightly worse light than the government courts, which is not great, 30%, almost a third of the Afghans in these provinces believe that Taliban courts are fair, quick, and efficient. 30%. And these are not the worst provinces in Afghanistan. So a summary of my findings on the views of the ordinary Afghans. Afghans demand access to quick, fair, and pious justice, particularly for dispute resolution, and it is a primary requirement for them. Afghans have a sophisticated understanding of which disputes and issues they would prefer to be resolved by which legal authorities. For example, family disputes by a religious authority, local disputes by the jirga, the tribal authorities, the elders, and other influentials, including, for example, landowners and people who have been on the Hajj. Disputes that cannot be resolved by local leaders to be decided by government courts, and serious disputes and criminal activities also to be decided by government courts, because a significant majority of Afghans do want those government courts to work. However, most Afghans, even in stable districts, perceive government courts to be unfair and ineffective, and a significant minority also consider them to be corrupt and too Western or secular. In the absence of effective government courts, a majority of Afghans are willing to seek an alternative to the Afghan legal system. They turn to the traditional courts, jirgas, elders, to religious authorities, but increasingly to the Taliban. For a majority, the primary reasons for the appeal of Taliban courts include the facade of Islamic piety and Sharia underpinnings, the appearance of incorruptibility, rapid decisions, and swift enforced punishments, a combination of ideology and practicality. Now I would like to talk quickly about the opinions of senior Afghan legal experts, whom we have also polled and interviewed. They have very, very similar views to those of ordinary Afghans, thank goodness. They see control of the Afghan legal system as a central battlefield in the struggle against the Taliban. They also think that the flaws in the current legal system are contributing significantly to the growth in Taliban influence and credibility. The Afghan legal system, as they see it, as they believe the population sees it, is considered to be illegitimate, primarily because of corruption and perceived ties with Western secular non-Muslim concepts. A perception that is reinforced by the Taliban through their propaganda. Taliban courts are generally perceived to be more pious, less corrupt, local, They will arrive at a quick decision and will swiftly implement punishment. Yet, Taliban courts have no Islamic legal legitimacy, while government courts actually do. The Constitution and the government of Afghanistan's legal system are founded on and underpinned by an adherence to the tenets and principles of Islamic law, and more than 80% of Afghan judges have been trained at accredited Islamic schools and Sharia institutions. Unfortunately, this Islamic foundation is lost on or unknown to many Afghans. Major problems facing the Afghan legal system include poor paying conditions, inadequate security, especially for key support staff. We are getting better at providing security for the judges, but how will a court function without all of the key support staff who generally get no security whatsoever? Poor facilities, especially at the local level. Insufficient, well-trained administrative staff to make the court work. Poor communications with other key partners, including the police, and inadequate record keeping. Many other opinions that they offer, many cases that would be heard by Western courts and will continue to be adjudicated by local religious and traditional authorities, including imams, elders, and jirgas. They are concerned, however, at an increasing government-encouraged devolution of legal and other authorities to local leaders, which is undermining the legitimacy of the government system. They comment that Afghan conservatism cannot be changed while the country is so unstable and the legal system is in such disarray. The primary focus for the future, according to them, should therefore be on the provision of effective rule of law under the current Islamic constitution and legal framework. Then broader reform can be considered. In conclusion, I'd like to offer some of my own thoughts and recommendations. Progress in Afghanistan cannot be achieved until government corruption is significantly reduced and Afghans can begin to trust and have confidence in their leaders and key institutions. Let me tell you a story from one Malik from Wardak province. He said, if you commit a crime, you can pay a bribe so you don't get arrested. If you get arrested, you can pay a bribe so you're released. If you get charged, you can pay a bribe so you don't go to court. If you go to court, you can pay a bribe so that you're found innocent. If you're found guilty, you can pay a bribe so you don't go to jail. And if you go to jail, you can pay a bribe so you can be released early. When you're facing that sort of situation, why would you support your government? I believe our mission will fail in Afghanistan unless President Karzai can be compelled to deal decisively with corruption. The Islamic underpinnings of the Afghan legal system is an asset, not a detriment, and it needs to be strengthened and publicized whilst of course still respecting human rights, because the Afghans demand piety in their legal system. In addressing the many shortcomings of the Afghan justice sector, our primary focus, in my view, must be on ensuring that the current legal system is effectively implemented down to the lowest levels of Afghan society. The most important improvements we could focus on must include a purge of the most corrupt judges to restore confidence and send a message to everybody else. The justice sector requires a robust internal affairs organization to deal with corruption, as do all the other security and justice, the sector's institutions like the police and the army. A public complaints authority with power is also needed. Courts below the provincial level must be mobile. True circuit court judges safely riding the range. Because that's what appeals to, with the Taliban courts. They're local, they show up, they act swiftly, and they punish. We must improve the benefits for judges, prosecutors, and administrative staff to reduce the necessity to take bribes. My senior Afghan researchers are paid double what a judge is paid. Better buildings, facilities are needed, and including for the recording and safe storage of proceedings. We need to encourage the President of Afghanistan to end the tacit devolution of legal authority and other authority to religious and traditional entities and courts. We should limit such authority to those areas and issues that the vast majority of the Afghans want adjudicated at the local level. We should explain the underpinnings of Islam and Sharia within its existing constitution and legal system, and encourage the judges and others to follow those tenets in order to reduce the appeal of and the need for other Islamic legal authority, to include imams and the Taliban. And we should explore ways to codify traditional legal authority, develop standards for punishments, a system for formally recording findings, and provide training for traditional implementers such as elders and other community influencers. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for that rich set of presentations that are both quite detailed and provocative in terms of the description of the situation in Afghanistan. It's been interesting and quite reflective thoughts about what the prescription might be for solutions going forward. I am one of the many people who have appeared on panels here who knows practically nothing about Afghanistan or Iraq, but that never stopped a law professor from saying something. So I'm going to say a couple of things sort of from a comparative law perspective and about what I think these presentations raise, and then we'll throw it open to the floor. We should have at least 20 minutes or so for questions. One is, in some sense, the story that you all are telling and that we've been hearing at this conference, in general, is the latest, or at least the currently most compelling wave of trying to implement some model of rule of law, one that's clearly influenced by foreign paradigms. We've seen a lot of those over the years, and they've had different purposes. Sometimes it's to promote development, the law and development movement, and there's clearly a piece of that going on here, that without prosperity, it's going to be much more difficult in Afghanistan. Sometimes it's what my former colleague Kim Shepley calls the not that constitution. That is setting up a legal order that is profoundly different from the distasteful one that went before. We saw that post-Soviet. There's clearly some of that going on post-Taliban. Sometimes, and this is something that the Afghan case and to a degree the Iraq case brings to the fore, we're using law, and particularly constitutional law, to avoid chaos, to create a functioning system where the prior one has more or less been wiped out, often quite violently. And all of that is sort of going on here, but what the additional wrinkle that it seems comes out of this that poses some of the questions you're grappling with is that there is a persisting alternative in Afghanistan, kicking around an informal justice of various types, where it's not the system that one's trying to create as a state-centered system or nothing, which would have been the case, say, demolishing a Soviet-style system. But there is something out there that looks in some ways tolerable, in some ways desirable, and in some ways quite off-putting. And so it's a very different task. And I think that poses novel challenges to the usual question that evangelists for American-style or Western-style legal institutions have to grapple with. So it's an interesting case to pose those questions. One of the other themes that runs through your commentaries, it seems to me, is this question about what makes a set of laws or legal institutions good or legitimate or worth pursuing in the context of Afghanistan. One could think that it should fit with to some significant degree with underlying norms, values, and pre-existing institutions, and you all accept that to some degree. One could think it depends on it being the product of a legitimate process, and that's some of what your discussion, I think, got into, a sort of positivist legitimacy. Or one might think that it has to be good by some standard, protecting human rights, providing some minimal level of justice. Those are very different notions of what it works. And finally, the question that you all are grappling with is what's going to work? What's going to be effective? The best ideas in the world are not terribly useful if they lie fallow. And here there are some, I think, some really universal questions that are coming up in particularly acute forms in Afghanistan today. One is, how much do you try to diverge from the underlying reality? Clearly one wants to change it somewhat. If you get too far out ahead, you not only fail to implement what you're trying to do, but you may delegitimate the entire project. So it's just trying to find that optimal gap in a sort of law leads model. The other thing I think that some of your discussion gets into, because there are these informal institutions, is that we tend to think of laws and legal institutions as too much of a piece, and they really aren't. I mean, it is possible to have very strong legal institutions that are pretty darn lawless. Courts and authoritarian regimes often do that. It is possible to have pretty good laws that have some legitimacy and some social traction, but they don't get implemented through the state court system. One sees a lot of that in China. And then finally, the sort of other interesting question I think this really raises, related to this last one, is how to accommodate the system you're trying to put in place, the underlying one. I've touched on that a few times, but it really just, I think, is a fascinating set of presentations where it keeps, as I listen to it, it keeps sort of shifting before my eyes. I mean, is it rivalrous? Is it accommodation? Is it a kind of complementarity? Is it an almost federalist system or a sort of allocation by sphere system? And is there a view that it's going to transform over time? Now, I think you all buy into various pieces of that to some degree, but I just found it an absolutely fascinating set of questions and comments on that. And so with the invitation to take any of those themes up if you wish, I will turn it back over to you, but I also want to turn it over to questions from the audience. As I say, we've got about 20 minutes, I think, before we have to end this session, so we got time for questions. If you have one, please raise it, but please make it a question, not a speech. Yeah. Do we have a microphone? Yes, we do. It's coming to you. And if you want to get in the queue for questions, please raise your hand so that our microphone person can know where to go next.
This grows out of Jacques' comments that he just made. Andrew, I don't question the importance of corruption as an issue, nor in my comment here, my question, am I going to question your survey data. But I do want to raise a point about the displacement of institutions and relationship of formal and informal institutions. About a year and a half ago, Pakistan, the Swat Valley was taken, Banir was under siege. American officials were saying the reason this has happened, the primary causal factor is that the formal courts aren't working well. And the Talibanization is a direct result of the failure of formal courts to work. So I was curious about this. I'd done a lot of work on Pakistan over the years. And I actually had a long meeting with the leading district court judge in the Swat Valley and reviewed his records. And it was quite clear that the Swat Valley, the formal courts, were functioning at least as well as the formal courts in the vast majority of Pakistan. So I just want to raise that as an issue on this simple displacement. Oh, Talibanization is a result of courts not working, and I'd like you to reflect on that.
Well, I hope I didn't convey the idea that going to a Taliban court conveys the fact that there's a Taliban shadow government in, say, Wardak province, and everybody is either supportive of or coerced by the Taliban. In fact, it's quite the reverse. Even in districts where they're supportive of the government, by and large, and where they don't like the Taliban pretty strongly, they're still turning to a Taliban court to get disputes resolved that cannot be resolved within the traditional structure. That isn't to say that in some areas Taliban are supplanting the traditional structures. So this is not just a case of Talibanization. It can be a case of this is just where I can get swift, informal justice and someone gets punished because the government court system is failing. What that does is contributes towards the people's perceptions of their overall government failing. And the more that they perceive that, the less inclined they are to support it. And in an area where Taliban influence is significant, even where the population isn't supportive, you're being asked to do a lot. And that is to put your life at risk, to put your family at risk, to resist them. And that you're less and less inclined to do that when what you're fighting for isn't something you believe in. So, if Afghans don't feel they can rely on their court system, their government to provide dispute resolution in all those areas where they want it, then they're going to be less and less inclined to support the Taliban. In some districts, the government, and more inclined to support the Taliban. In some districts, the courts function well, and then this doesn't come up as an issue, and Taliban courts don't exist. But also in those areas, the Taliban may actually also be more influential. So it's another reason why ISAF and IJC have particularly started to focus at the district level because of the substantial differences in each district within even one province. I hope that helps.
I think there's no doubt that the court in Afghanistan is very corrupt, and it takes months and months and bags of money in order to solve the problem. But I don't think the solution would be to promote informal justice system. The reason I'm saying this is the capacity that we have in the ground. If we cannot push and promote the informal justice system and control it, actually, or monitor it, how can we do the thousands of these shuras to respect human rights? So, in my personal view, I mean, we are against the promoting of informal justice system. It is existing in the country, and the people has the choice if they want to go. But the main job for us should be to promote the formal justice system in the country. If he really wants to have the institutions functional in Afghanistan, if he really wants to build a society to be law enforced, not really this and that person's mentality and opinion. Because, I mean, this informal justice system usually is commonly, it's dominated by men. And previously it was elder person from the society, but in these years, after the wars in Afghanistan, it's mainly dominated by the commanders, which are clearly known under violation of human rights. So I don't think that's a good idea to promote a parallel justice system in the country, either if it's police or a court or a judiciary system.
In fact, one of the main misconceptions about the model I showed earlier is the promotion of informal justice system. I'm not for, and we never say that we should promote informal justice system. It is basically is linking it to the formal so that each complement the other. So it is, I agree with you. And I fully agree with you also with the police, that the local police. As far as the dominance of commanders and local strongmen in the justice system, we did a survey of 2,329 people for the Afghanistan Human Development Report. And 80% of the people say that the people who have a determining role in the jirga is elderly, respected elderly. 14% or 15% say yes, it is military commander. So I agree with you. But that dominance is limited. It is mainly elders. But again, to come to the main point, I agree, we do not promote informal justice system. We link it to the formal so that the two complement one another. Thank you. Yes.
Dr. Samar, thank you very much for coming here today and addressing our university. I was really disturbed by the fact that there is a law that was passed that gives immunity to the warlords at this point, just because I was personally affected and many Afghans that we know have been affected by these warlords. Is there any sort of grassroots movement going on right now to reverse this, or possibly to hold a tribunal to bring these people to justice?
Well, unfortunately not, because what was happening when the war against Taliban started, or the intervention by international community started in Afghanistan, unfortunately, the US and also the other international community, including the British, they choose the other warlord, the Mujahideen warlord, to fight against the Taliban. So they are friends of them. In fact, they became more powerful, they became more rich in terms of getting more money and more resources from their friends. So there's no, first of all, there's no political will and commitment on providing justice. Secondly, I mean that the public wants, because we did a consultation, national consultation, in Afghanistan and also in Pakistan and Iran with the refugees about the past crimes. The people come up, the majority of the people wants justice, but not necessarily criminal justice. So different kind of justice, vetting them from position of power, take some symbolic act by the government, first of all, acknowledge of the suffering of the people. And then finally for some criminal justice, but for some big fishes. But the problem here is that even the small things has not been done. The vetting has not been done. Practically, you see most of the governors are still the warlords. And even they are the one who introduced ministers and deputy ministers and then district commissioners and also district chief of police and chief of police. So it's very, very confusing for the people. That's why I think one of the reasons that the impunity continues and the culture of impunity continues in the country and the people lose confidence on the government. So let alone the judiciary system.
I also just wanted to say one more thing. Dr. Wardak, I'm fascinated by your hybrid model because I did my thesis on judicial system in Afghanistan. I will talk to you after the conference because I don't want to take any more questions.
Thank you.
Yes.
Question to all the panel. It seems to me that a lot of what you're describing is the government's struggle to achieve legitimacy, which is causing this tension between the formal and the informal legal justice systems. I just wanted to ask all of you what you think the single biggest step towards the government achieving the legitimacy needed to strengthen the formal over the informal system would be.
You get to pick one.
Okay.
Pick two.
The lack of government legitimacy is undermining everything. And the rule of law is just one sector of it. It's not undermining the legitimacy of the traditional legal system. That will exist for a long time. And Afghans choose to go to that traditional legal authority to resolve specific disputes. So the issue is fix the government legal system first, and then one can begin to think about building a bridge between that and the traditional, and then also then thinking about how we can modify the traditional system so it becomes more in line with human rights norms. So the government has to fix the things that I said were wrong within its legal system. And by corruption, I don't just mean passing of money. I mean bureaucratic corruption. I mean personal corruption in terms of behaviors. And being influenced by other people and making decisions that are not based on the law. So it's fixing the administration of justice, it's fixing the infrastructure of justice, it's fixing the honesty of the judges. Not all of them are bad, but there are quite a few that are. It's speeding up the process. Even an honest judge who fails to deliver a verdict in a timely manner is perceived badly by the population. So there's a whole range of things the government needs to get right to deal with the issues the Afghan wants them to adjudicate on, and then we can think about all those other things.
I have a very slightly different idea. I agree with you. The formal justice system need to be not only legitimate, but also trustworthy, fair, and transparent. But one thing, I'm sure there are legal scholars here. You know, the idea of a centralized justice system is, to me, it is modern, but it is outdated. There is a new paradigm, restorative justice or community justice models. Even in this country, you know, many young offenders' behavior is dealt with by local people in Japan, in China through local committees, even in Iran. So we should not really follow your models or other Western models. I must be honest. Even the model, the centralized justice system here, it's not very successful. And also the outcome, the final outcome, as far as criminal justice is concerned, it is really not as fair. Prison don't rehabilitate. It actually creates more criminals. And secondly, you know, even in the prison, the formal justice system, the prison service is a part of it. Look, who are in prisons in this country? It is the disadvantaged and mainly young black men. Not necessarily these people are criminal. This is because they are in a disadvantaged position. So we should not be repeating the mistakes that you have been making. We should learn. This is a new model. It is, I'm a criminologist. This idea of retributive justice, it is a bit old-fashioned. It is modern, but we have newer ideas, which is restorative justice. So when I emphasize, I slightly disagree with you here, that we do not need to first build the formal justice system and then say that, okay, how could we link it to the informal? We should do the two simultaneously. So I think we need, even if the formal justice system is very effective, it is also a good idea to have informal justice system, people who have more trust in it, it is cost effective, and people have ownership of the process. And more importantly, it is reintegrative. It is not disintegrative. I mean, one of the problems of the criminal justice system in the Western world is it creates more criminals. There is abundant evidence. In the UK, someone who goes to the prison for the first time, about 70 to 80%, he is very likely to end up again in the prison. It is because of the labeling process. Someone who goes to the prison, he loses his job, he loses his relationships. When he comes back, he can't find an employment, and he's seen as a bad criminal with criminal record. So what else he could do except committing more crime? But this kind, the Jirga kind of course, not Jirga kind, but the restorative justice model, it reintegrates offenders back in the community. So I say, in order to create a legitimate justice in Afghanistan, we need to build the two simultaneously and link them to one another.
You want to weigh in on this, or?
I think knowing the reality in the ground and the amount of, let's say, resources, and particularly human resources, I don't think we can build both of them in a parallel way in the country, because honestly, what is lacking in Afghanistan is lack of trained, qualified, committed people. So if we have 3 people or 4 people, if we divide them between the informal justice system and formal justice system, we just dilute our action, I think. Well, I think it's a long discussion. We will continue. But in my view, if we educate the people, then the people will decide to which one they should go. I mean, the daily mediation is going on in every community. It's not only in Afghanistan. But to push for or to legalize or legitimize the Shura system that we have in Afghanistan, it's always discriminatory against women. And I don't think it's going to help equality or justice. Or for example, when the people goes to the Taliban justice because the governmental system is corrupt, the judiciary system is corrupt, the people goes for revenge rather than for justice. Because they are quick, they decide and hang somebody quickly in an hour and finish the whole problem. Maybe that person has to run for years in the court. So that is one of the reasons that the people goes to the Taliban. Otherwise, they don't really respect the Taliban justice. I mean, we had Taliban, we got fed up with them.
I think we have time for one last question. Yeah, near the front.
I think I recently saw a television documentary about how Turkish, what do we call them, TV dramas are influencing other people who are Islamic to discuss topics and maybe see examples of things that they can't do in their own country. And I'm wondering if we see this as a long process. I mean long, 20, 50 years. Is there any role for radio and television and drama, like by satellite or something, to play a role in this? So, for example, we all know in our own cultures experiences where a novel or a play or something had a profound influence in America, say in race relations, something like the Mockingbird story, To Kill a Mockingbird or something. Is there any hope that, by encouraging those type of things, we can help people understand how these, how things could be done better in the country, or for people to come to some consensus. I'm wondering about that, and I'm wondering also about how political discussions are carried on in a country with high illiteracy. Are people nevertheless going to be talking on cell phones in the future? Are they going to be able to see what's happening in their country on television in a way they didn't before? Because fortunately, these communication systems are getting cheaper. I realize we're talking about a country with not a lot of resources, but fortunately, for example, for us, radio did make a difference in our...
I want to give the panel a chance to answer. So the advent of modern communications devices, what do you see the impact of that being?
I think.
Please.
Well, I think it's really important. Any tools that we can give awareness to the people will help. And radio is very successful in Afghanistan, so we can use that radio and television program for awareness raising of people to use either informal justice system or formal justice system.
I'd like to firstly point out that because an Afghan isn't illiterate doesn't mean he isn't the smartest person on the planet. In fact, to survive in Afghan society, particularly in some of the rural areas, you have to be damn smart. Secondly, Afghans communicate with their oral tradition in ways that we couldn't even imagine, so that accurate messaging travels right the way across the country without much deviation. I'm highly impressed with their ability to communicate. They rely extensively on family members who are, for example, in Kabul. And with the fact that now many Afghans have cell phones, they can directly talk with people either who have an education or who are connected or see things occurring in Kabul, Kandahar, so they know what's going on. They rely on people like shopkeepers and taxi drivers because they both have access to radio and power. So they're hearing what's being said on the radio. So even though they may not have power in their own village, their own home, they're still hearing things. Television isn't the dominant media there. Radio is, and the written word, albeit sometimes read by somebody else. But they're quite accurate in passing on what they read to somebody else without too much interpretation. I think the example of the Turks, and there are many other examples, the use of entertainment rather than educational messaging is a very powerful way of getting the message across. We have a huge effort in the information operations, some used to call it PSYOP, information support, strategic communications, public affairs, but by and large it's simplistic, basic, and not very effective because it's focusing on advertising, public service announcements, and those really don't have much impact on people. But we could be much more sophisticated and help the Afghan government to educate people through programming of various different types, use of poetry, use of other forms of entertainment. They're all superb medium for getting messaging across, but when we do it, we have to remember it has to be done by Afghans for Afghans. We don't understand their narratives, we don't speak their language, and we're not very good at communicating with them. But it's a great tool.
A brief last word on that?
Yeah, just very briefly, I agree the role of media and civil education. But what is important is, Afghanistan is as much part of the global village as this city is. So people are actually exposed to communication, to modern technology, and probably there are as many mobile telephones in Afghanistan as there are here. But what is crucial is, maybe more, yeah, because we don't have this LAN system, a telephone system. But what is crucial is really creating channel of communication between the state and the local people. That is most important. And again, I go back to my model. That is one way. It's not about only justice, but also how to get the state's message to the local people, and how could the two communicate effectively.
Well, whatever the mechanisms of communication in Afghanistan, we certainly have had a very communicative panel over here, which has given us a great deal to think about and a great deal of information. So it is now time, however, for me to call this to a close, and we can engage in the great American form of communication, which is coffee and snacks, to continue our discussion. We'll reconvene at 4 o'clock for the final panel. Please join me in thanking our three panelists.